That old woman is the maid, don't talk to her. The words floated across aisle 7 beneath the cold fluorescent lights, sharp enough to turn heads from 10 feet away. Evelyn Whitmore stood beside the shopping cart, one hand resting lightly on a carton of eggs, her reflection faint in the glass freezer doors. The barcode scanner kept chirping. Amanda Carter didn't lower her voice. She adjusted her designer handbag on her shoulder and smiled at the clerk as if she had just clarified something harmless. Daniel stared at the credit card machine, studying the blinking screen as though it required intense concentration. The young cashier glanced at Evelyn uncertain, then quickly back at Amanda. Evelyn's fingers did not tremble. They simply smoothed the sleeve of her beige cardigan, the same cardigan she had worn when she signed the paperwork that helped her son move into his 3,200 square foot suburban home 2 years earlier. She remembered the closing day, the smell of fresh paint, the way Daniel had hugged her quickly before walking back to Amanda, who was already measuring wall space for art. Evelyn had told herself that love sometimes meant stepping into the background. In the store, the hum of refrigerators filled the silence that followed Amanda's remark. A couple pushing a cart slowed down, pretending to compare cereal prices. Evelyn felt their curiosity like a draft across her skin, but her face remained calm, almost serene. "It's all right," she said softly to the cashier, her voice steady, warm, unmistakably educated. Amanda's smile tightened for half a second. Outside, in the parking lot, the late afternoon sun reflected off the black SUV Amanda loved to drive, the one registered under a family trust she had never asked about. Evelyn picked up a gallon of milk and placed it carefully on the belt. The movement was precise, deliberate, as if dignity were something you could measure in inches. Daniel finally cleared his throat. "Mom, you don't have to carry that," he muttered without looking at her. She met his reflection in the metal card reader instead of his eyes. For a moment she saw him at 8 years old, clutching her hand on his first day of school, afraid of being left alone. The receipt printed with a thin mechanical whine. Amanda took it first. "We're in a hurry," she said lightly, already walking toward the exit. Evelyn followed. At her own pace, the automatic doors sliding open with a sigh. No one apologized. No one corrected the statement. But as she stepped into the sunlight and paused for just a breath, there was something unspoken in the way she straightened her shoulders, something that did not belong to a maid, nor to a woman diminished in aisle 7. It belonged to someone who understood exactly whose name was written on the deeds, the accounts, and the quiet foundations beneath everything Amanda believed was hers. Evelyn did not speak during the drive home. The neighborhood rolled past in quiet symmetry, trimmed hedges, wide driveways, flags moving gently in the late afternoon breeze. Daniel kept both hands on the steering wheel, his wedding band catching light each time he turned. Amanda scrolled through her phone, occasionally exhaling through her nose as if irritated by something she refused to name. The house appeared at the end of the cul-de-sac, tall white columns framing the porch, 3,200 square feet of polished reassurance. Evelyn stepped out slowly, smoothing her skirt before walking inside. The scent of vanilla candles greeted them. Amanda set her purse down on the marble kitchen island and began unloading groceries with brisk efficiency. "We have guests on Saturday," she said, not looking at Evelyn. "Please make sure the downstairs guest room is ready." The word please floated without warmth. Evelyn nodded once. She moved through the kitchen with measured grace, placing vegetables into the refrigerator, aligning cartons so labels faced outward. Small acts of order in a space that did not feel entirely hers. Daniel loosened his tie and disappeared upstairs without another word. Later that evening, Evelyn sat at the small desk in her room at the back of the house. The window overlooked the yard she had paid to landscape, though no one mentioned that anymore. Crickets chirped beyond the glass. She opened a slim metal box from the bottom drawer. Inside were neatly arranged folders, each tab labeled in careful handwriting. Property deed, trust documents, investment statements. Her name appeared again and again in understated ink. 2 years earlier, when Daniel had told her they were short on the down payment, she had signed without hesitation. She had liquidated a retirement account and wired the funds the same afternoon. Amanda had hugged her quickly that day, grateful and glowing. Gratitude, Evelyn had learned, can have a short expiration date. Down the hallway, laughter drifted from the master bedroom. Amanda's voice carried confidence, recounting the grocery store moment as if it were a clever anecdote. "People assume things all the time," she said lightly. "It is better to be clear." Evelyn closed the folder gently. Her reflection in the dark window looked composed, almost distant. There was no anger in her eyes, only recognition. She reached for her phone and scrolled to a familiar contact. Howard Bennett. The call rang twice before going to voicemail. She did not leave a message. Instead, she sent a brief text asking to schedule a meeting regarding trust matters. She placed the phone face down on the desk and turned off the lamp. In the darkness, the house felt quieter than it ever had, as if listening. Upstairs, footsteps crossed hardwood floors that technically rested on her foundation. Evelyn folded her hands in her lap and inhaled slowly, counting to 5, then releasing the breath just as steadily. Some corrections do not happen in grocery aisles. They happen in offices across polished tables, where signatures speak louder than pride. The meeting was set for Thursday at 10 in the morning, a time Evelyn chose deliberately, when the world felt orderly and decisions sounded clearer in daylight. She dressed in a tailored navy suit that had not left its garment bag in years and drove herself downtown, hands steady on the wheel. The bank building rose 12 stories above Main Street, its glass exterior reflecting a pale blue sky. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh coffee. Howard Bennett greeted her with professional warmth, not surprise. He had known her name long before Amanda ever stepped into that grocery store. They sat across from each other at a long walnut table, documents neatly arranged between them. "You asked to review the trust structure," he said calmly. Evelyn nodded. Her voice was measured, precise. "I would like to adjust residential occupancy terms and clarify beneficiary conditions." There was no bitterness in her tone, only clarity. Howard slid a folder toward her, opening to the property deed for the house on Maple Ridge Court. Her name appeared as primary holder under the Whitmore Family Trust. Daniel's name followed in smaller print as contingent beneficiary. Amanda's name did not appear at all. Evelyn studied the page for a moment, then signed the updated addendum that required written permission from the primary holder for any continued residency should household conditions change. The pen moved smoothly across the paper. Outside the conference room window, traffic flowed in disciplined lanes, unaware that quiet power was being redirected one signature at a time. When the meeting ended, Howard walked her to the elevator. "Everything will be processed within 48 hours, he assured her. She thanked him and stepped inside, watching the doors close with a soft metallic hush. That afternoon at home, Amanda prepared floral centerpieces for Saturday's guests. White hydrangeas arranged in crystal vases. Daniel paced in the kitchen reviewing work emails. Neither noticed the envelope placed carefully on the entryway console. It contained nothing dramatic, only copies of updated documents and a short formal notice requesting a family discussion on Sunday evening. Evelyn brewed herself a cup of tea and carried it to the back porch. The yard stretched wide and green, sunlight catching the edges of trimmed hedges she had once chosen from a catalog. She listened to the distant hum of a lawn-mower 3 houses down and felt something settle inside her. Not anger, not revenge, but alignment. Inside, Amanda laughed on the phone, recounting plans for new patio furniture, speaking confidently about investments and upgrades. The house held her voice easily, but ownership rested elsewhere, silent and patient. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the deck boards, Evelyn folded her hands around the warm mug and allowed herself a small, almost invisible smile. Some lessons do not arrive with raised voices. They arrive with certified letters, with notarized pages, with dates circled quietly on calendars. And Sunday was already marked. Sunday evening arrived with a sky the color of pale steel, the kind of quiet that settles before something shifts. The hydrangeas from the night before were beginning to soften at the edges, petals curling slightly under the warm air circulating through the house. Daniel stood near the fireplace, arms folded, reading the documents for the third time. Amanda paced across the living room rug, her heels clicking against hardwood in uneven rhythm. The envelope Evelyn had left on the console now lay open on the coffee table, its contents spread in careful alignment. Evelyn entered the room without announcement, wearing a simple cream blouse and tailored slacks, her posture straight, but unforced. She did not sit immediately. She allowed the silence to breathe. Daniel looked up first. Mom, what is this? His voice carried confusion more than accusation. Amanda picked up the addendum, scanning the legal language again as if it might rearrange itself into something harmless. Evelyn finally took a seat in the armchair near the window, folding her hands loosely in her lap. It is an update to the trust, she said evenly. Standard clarification. Amanda's eyebrows lifted. Clarification of what? The question held an edge but not control. Evelyn met her gaze, not with confrontation but with steadiness. Of residence and authority. The words were calm, almost gentle. Daniel shifted his weight. You are saying we need permission to live here? Evelyn inhaled slowly before answering. I am saying that this home has always been under my name, and the trust has conditions attached to it. The clock on the wall ticked once, twice, measuring the new reality in seconds. Amanda's composure flickered. We pay the utilities. We maintain the property. Her voice rose slightly, not enough to be a shout, but enough to betray the tremor beneath it. Evelyn nodded. And I appreciate that. But ownership and maintenance are not the same. She reached toward the table and turned one page so the signature line faced them clearly. Her name stood at the bottom in precise ink. Daniel stared at it as though seeing it for the first time. The room felt smaller now, though nothing had physically changed. Outside, a car drove past, headlights briefly brushing across the living room walls before disappearing. Amanda placed the document down more carefully than she had picked it up. Why are you doing this? She asked. Evelyn did not answer immediately. She studied her son's face, the faint crease between his brows, the uncertainty he tried to mask. Because clarity prevents misunderstanding, she replied at last. Her tone remained soft but it carried weight. There was no mention of grocery stores, no repetition of careless words. There was only structure, legality, foundation. Daniel lowered himself into the sofa, exhaling slowly. The house seemed to listen. In that quiet living room beneath framed family photos and polished crown molding, the balance had shifted without raised voices or slammed doors. It had shifted because truth had been written down long before pride had spoken. The house felt different the next morning, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the conversation and were now holding their breath. Daniel left early for work, the sound of the garage door echoing longer than usual. Amanda remained at the kitchen island, staring at her untouched cup of coffee until the steam faded into nothing. Evelyn moved through the space quietly, rinsing her teacup, wiping the counter, performing familiar motions with deliberate calm. No one mentioned the documents again, but their presence lingered like an invisible watermark over every surface. By mid-morning, Amanda's phone calls began. Her tone shifted between disbelief and reassurance as she spoke to a friend about temporary legal technicalities. The words sounded forced, rehearsed. Evelyn stepped onto the back porch with a folder tucked under her arm. Inside were updated trust summaries and a written proposal outlining two options: formal rental agreement under clearly defined terms, or 60 days to secure independent housing. She placed the folder neatly on the patio table and sat down, letting the sunlight warm her hands. The yard stretched out in quiet symmetry, sprinklers ticking in steady intervals, droplets catching light like tiny prisms. Daniel returned that evening earlier than usual. His tie was loosened, his expression tired. He found Evelyn in the living room reviewing mail. I spoke to a lawyer, he said carefully. Evelyn looked up, not surprised. And, she asked. Daniel hesitated. He confirmed the trust is valid. Completely. The admission seemed to cost him something. Amanda stood a few feet behind him, arms crossed, her confidence thinner now, stretched by reality. Evelyn gestured toward the folder on the table. I am not asking you to leave tomorrow, she said evenly. I am asking for respect and clarity. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture from childhood resurfacing under pressure. We never meant to disrespect you, he said quietly. The statement hovered in the room, uncertain. Evelyn studied his face, seeing both the boy who once held her hand and the man who had allowed silence to replace defense. Intent and action are not always aligned, she replied gently. Amanda finally stepped forward. So what happens now? Her voice lacked its former sharpness. Evelyn stood, smoothing her blouse as she did. Now, she said, we decide how this family moves forward with honesty. She did not raise her voice. She did not recount past words. The power did not need volume. It rested in signatures, in timelines, in the quiet authority of someone who had nothing to prove and nothing to beg for. Outside, dusk settled over Maple Ridge Court, porch lights flickering on one by one along the cul-de-sac. Inside, beneath high ceilings and carefully framed photographs, the illusion of ownership had thinned to transparency. What remained was structure, undeniable and written in ink. And for the first time since aisle 7, Daniel and Amanda understood that the foundation beneath their feet had never belonged to them at all. The air inside the house shifted over the next few days, not with shouting or slammed doors, but with distance measured in footsteps and closed conversations. Amanda moved through the kitchen more carefully now, her heels softer against the tile, her tone restrained when she spoke. Daniel spent longer hours at the office, returning after sunset with the faint smell of city air clinging to his jacket. Evelyn continued her routines without alteration. She rose at 6, brewed her tea, and read financial news at the dining table as morning light stretched across the hardwood floors. On Wednesday evening, Daniel requested another conversation. He stood near the staircase, shoulders squared as if preparing for negotiation rather than family discussion. Amanda sat beside him, hands folded tightly in her lap. Evelyn joined them in the living room, posture straight, expression composed. Daniel cleared his throat. "We have been looking at rental options," he said carefully. 3-bedroom houses in the next town over are running about $3,000 a month. The number hung in the air, heavier than it would have been a week earlier. Amanda added, "It would take at least 60 days to secure something reasonable." Evelyn nodded once. "The timeline in the proposal allows for that," she replied calmly. She reached for a small leather notebook resting on the side table and opened it to a page already marked. "If you choose to remain here under a formal agreement, the monthly occupancy fee will reflect fair market value, adjusted for maintenance and property taxes." Daniel absorbed the words slowly. The concept of paying for what he believed was already his carried a quiet sting, though no accusation had been spoken. Amanda's gaze dropped to the floor for a moment before lifting again. "We were not aware," she said, her voice subdued, "that everything was structured this way." Evelyn closed the notebook gently. "Awareness is not automatic," she answered. "It requires attention." Silence settled between them, not hostile but honest. Outside, a delivery truck rolled past the house, its engine humming steadily before fading down the street. Daniel finally exhaled. "I should have asked more questions 2 years ago," he admitted. It was the first sentence that held responsibility instead of defense. Evelyn regarded him with softened eyes. "Growth often begins with uncomfortable clarity," she said. Amanda shifted slightly, the edge of her composure smoothing into something more reflective than proud. "We will review the options," she said quietly. The conversation did not erupt into apology or reconciliation. It remained grounded, factual, structured. Yet beneath the measured words, something intangible had changed. The house no longer felt like a stage for image or assumption. It felt like a place governed by reality. Later that night, as Evelyn prepared for bed, she paused by the hallway mirror. The reflection staring back at her was steady, composed, unshaken. She had not raised her voice. She had not demanded recognition. She had simply allowed truth to stand where illusion once had. And in that quiet authority, the foundation of Maple Ridge Court had been redefined without a single dramatic gesture. By the following week, the atmosphere inside the house had settled into something almost formal, like colleagues sharing office space rather than family sharing a home. Daniel printed rental listings each evening, spreading them across the dining table beneath the chandelier that Evelyn had selected years ago from a catalog marked premium finishes. Amanda began packing small, non-essential items into cardboard boxes she ordered online, folding decorative throw blankets with precise movements, as if tidiness could restore control. Evelyn observed without interference. She continued her routines, watering the front roses at 7 in the morning, reviewing quarterly statements at the kitchen table, answering emails from Howard Bennett regarding minor adjustments to the trust portfolio. One afternoon, Amanda paused near the doorway of Evelyn's room, hesitation visible in the way her fingers lingered against the frame. "We found a place," she said quietly, "about 12 miles from here. It is smaller. 2,400 square feet. The number carried humility now, no longer comparison. Evelyn looked up from the open ledger in her lap. That sounds appropriate, she replied gently. Amanda nodded once, absorbing the absence of sarcasm. Later that evening, Daniel joined his mother on the back porch. The sky glowed in muted orange tones, and a light breeze shifted the leaves overhead. I should have spoken up that day, he said without preface. The memory did not need naming. Evelyn rested her hands on the armrests of her chair. Silence teaches more than argument, she answered. Daniel swallowed, his voice lower than usual. I did not realize how much you sacrificed. Evelyn studied the yard rather than his face. Sacrifice is not meant to be displayed, she said. It is meant to support. The sprinkler system clicked on in steady intervals, water arching across the grass in symmetrical rhythm. Daniel watched the pattern for a moment before speaking again. We will move within the 60 days, he said. We will handle the transition respectfully. The word respectfully lingered in the air, deliberate this time. Evelyn inclined her head, acknowledging the effort behind it. There was no triumph in her expression, no visible satisfaction, only alignment. Inside, Amanda sealed another box with careful pressure along the tape. The house echoed slightly now as decor thinned and walls began to reveal more empty space. What had once felt like permanence had revealed itself as temporary shelter. On the final Sunday before their departure, the three of them shared dinner at the long wooden table. Conversation remained measured but civil. Plates were passed, water glasses refilled, small courtesies restored. When the meal ended, Daniel stood and cleared his throat. Thank you, he said simply. It was not a grand apology, but it was direct. Evelyn met his eyes and nodded once. Outside, the porch light cast a steady glow across the driveway where moving trucks would soon park. The foundation beneath the house remained unchanged, solid and certain. And within that quiet certainty, dignity had not demanded recognition. It had simply stood its ground until recognition arrived on its own. Moving day arrived with a pale gray sky, and the low hum of a rental truck idling at the curb. Two movers carried boxes down the front steps in steady rhythm, their boots thudding softly against the wooden porch Evelyn had once chosen for its solid oak finish. The house echoed differently now, each footstep traveling farther through rooms stripped of excess. Amanda stood in the entryway holding a clipboard, checking items off a list with controlled precision. There were no sharp tones in her voice anymore, only efficiency. Daniel moved between rooms carrying framed photographs, pausing briefly before removing one from the wall in the hallway. It showed the three of them at a backyard barbecue 2 summers earlier, sunlight bright across their faces. He studied it for a second longer than necessary before wrapping it in brown paper. Evelyn remained near the staircase, hands lightly clasped, observing without interference. She wore a simple light gray dress and low heels, composed as ever. When the last box was loaded, Daniel stepped back inside, the empty living room stretching wide behind him. We are all set, he said quietly. Amanda joined him near the doorway, her expression thoughtful rather than proud. The marble kitchen island stood bare now, no floral arrangements, no decorative bowls. Just polished stone and clean lines. Evelyn walked to the front door and opened it fully, letting fresh air sweep through the foyer. Take care of the new place, she said, her voice even and sincere. Amanda met her gaze for a moment then nodded. Thank you for the time, she replied, the pause between words revealing more than explanation could. Daniel stepped forward and embraced his mother briefly, not out of obligation but intention. The hug was steady, grounded. When they walked down the driveway toward the truck, Evelyn did not follow. She stood beneath the porch light fixture, watching as the engine started and the vehicle eased down Maple Ridge Court. The sound faded gradually, leaving only the rustle of leaves and the distant chirp of birds. Inside, the house felt larger, quieter, entirely hers once again. Sunlight streamed through the front windows, illuminating empty space with soft clarity. Evelyn closed the door gently and turned the lock with a calm click. No celebration, no dramatic release. Just a quiet restoration of balance. She walked back into the living room, her steps measured, and allowed herself a single small breath of relief. The foundation had not moved. It had simply been reclaimed. 3 weeks after the truck disappeared down Maple Ridge Court, the house had settled into a new rhythm. Sunlight moved freely across open floors, no longer interrupted by stacked boxes or hurried footsteps. Evelyn rearranged the living room slowly, placing a single armchair near the window where afternoon light stretched in long golden lines. She replaced the heavy drapes with sheer linen panels that allowed the room to breathe. The silence no longer felt tense. It felt intentional. One evening the doorbell rang just after 6. Daniel stood on the porch alone, hands in his coat pockets, the early fall air brushing color into his cheeks. He looked smaller somehow, not diminished but thoughtful. Evelyn opened the door without hesitation. They sat at the kitchen table, 2 cups of tea between them. Daniel spoke first. "The new place is comfortable," he said. "It feels earned." The word carried humility rather than pride. He described the smaller yard, the narrower driveway, the way he now reviewed every expense before signing. Evelyn listened without interruption, her gaze steady. "Responsibility grows best when it is rooted in reality," she said gently. Daniel nodded, understanding more now than he had months before. There was no mention of past remarks, no revisiting of embarrassment. The lesson had already completed itself. When he stood to leave, he paused near the doorway. "I am proud to be your son," he said quietly. The sentence did not seek forgiveness. It offered recognition. Evelyn touched his sleeve briefly, a gesture both simple and sincere. After he left, she stepped onto the porch. The neighborhood lights glowed softly against the darkening sky. A cool breeze moved through the trees, carrying the scent of distant fireplaces. Inside, the house stood steady, grounded, entirely aligned with the name on its deed. Evelyn closed the door and turned off the hallway light, her reflection momentarily visible in the glass. There had been no argument in the grocery store, no dramatic correction in public. Only time, clarity, and signatures placed with calm intention. She did not win an argument. She did not reclaim respect through volume. She reclaimed it through structure. And in the quiet certainty of her own home, dignity did not shout. It simply glowed. Autumn settled fully over Maple Ridge Court, painting the trees in muted shades of amber and rust. Evelyn spent her mornings walking the neighborhood loop, exactly 1 mile from her front door and back, her steps steady against the sidewalk dusted with fallen leaves. Neighbors who once offered polite nods now stopped to speak a little longer. Word travels quietly in places like this, not through gossip but through observation. They had noticed the moving truck. They had noticed the stillness afterward. One afternoon, Evelyn drove to the same grocery store she had visited months earlier. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as they always did. The automatic doors opened with a familiar sigh. She pushed her cart slowly down aisle 7, selecting a carton of eggs, a gallon of milk, a loaf of bread. Nothing dramatic, nothing symbolic. Just ordinary choices made without tension. At the checkout counter, the same young cashier recognized her. This time there was no confusion in his eyes. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Whitmore," he said politely. She offered a small warm smile. "Good afternoon." No explanation was required. Outside, she loaded the groceries into her sedan, arranging the bags carefully so nothing tipped during the short drive home. The air carried a crisp chill around 55 degrees, the kind that hints at approaching winter but still allows sunlight to linger. Later that evening Daniel called. His voice sounded grounded, steadier than before. He spoke about budgeting, about assembling furniture himself instead of hiring contractors, about learning the difference between ownership and assumption. Evelyn listened, offering measured encouragement without taking credit. When the call ended, she placed the phone down and looked around her quiet living room. The armchair by the window, the soft linen curtains, the open space reclaimed by intention. The house no longer held tension. It held clarity. She walked to the hallway mirror and paused, studying her reflection not for validation, but for acknowledgement. There had been no public correction, no dramatic confrontation. Only time, patience, and documents signed with steady hands. Outside, porch lights flickered on one by one across the cul-de-sac, casting warm halos against the darkening sky. Evelyn turned off the kitchen light and allowed the house to settle into night. Respect had not returned through argument. It had returned through structure. And in the calm rhythm of her own footsteps echoing across her floor, She understood that dignity, once restored, does not need to announce itself. It simply remains. Winter arrived quietly, laying a thin silver frost across the lawns of Maple Ridge Court. The mornings were colder now, breath visible in the air as Evelyn completed her 1-mile walk before sunrise. She had added a wool coat and leather gloves to her routine, but her pace remained steady. Inside the house, a small fire flickered in the living room fireplace, casting warm light across the polished floors. The rooms no longer echoed. They felt intentional, curated, lived in with purpose rather than assumption. One Saturday afternoon, a modest sedan pulled into the driveway. Daniel stepped out first, followed by Amanda, both dressed simply, their movements less hurried than they had once been. They carried a small potted evergreen as a housewarming gift, though the house had always been hers. Evelyn opened the door before they rang the bell, as if she had sensed their arrival through the still winter air. They stood in the foyer for a moment, the quiet between them no longer strained. "We wanted to stop by," Daniel said, his voice measured and sincere. Amanda held the plant carefully, her posture composed but softer than before. "To say thank you," she added, the words deliberate. Evelyn accepted the evergreen and placed it near the window where sunlight could reach it. They sat together in the living room, cups of tea warming their hands. Conversation moved gently from work to weather to the small adjustments of their new home. There was no tension beneath the words now, only understanding. At one point, Amanda looked around the room, her gaze thoughtful. "You built all of this long before we understood what it meant," she said quietly. Evelyn met her eyes without triumph. "Foundations are not always visible," she replied. Outside, snow began to fall in light, steady flakes, settling across rooftops and lawns with patient grace. When Daniel and Amanda stood to leave, their goodbye held intention, not obligation. The door closed softly behind them, and Evelyn remained in the foyer for a moment, listening to the calm that followed. She turned back toward the living room, toward the steady warmth of the fire and the quiet certainty of ownership earned and protected. Respect had not been demanded. It had been revealed layer by layer, like frost melting under morning sun. And in the stillness of her home, dignity remained exactly where it belonged. Spring returned to Maple Ridge Court with a softness that felt almost ceremonial. The frost disappeared from the lawns, replaced by new green blades pushing steadily through the soil. Evelyn stood at the front window one morning, sunlight resting gently across her shoulders, and watched as the neighborhood came back to life. Children rode bicycles in slow circles along the cul-de-sac. Delivery trucks passed without urgency. The house behind her no longer carried echoes of tension or unspoken correction. It carried only stillness and choice. She spent the afternoon sorting through old storage boxes in the upstairs closet, keeping some photographs, discarding others, not out of resentment but clarity. In one frame, Daniel stood beside her at his college graduation, pride visible in the way she held his arm. She placed that photograph on the hallway table, not as nostalgia, but as acknowledgement. Growth does not erase the past. It reshapes it. Later that week, Daniel invited her to dinner at their new home 12 miles away. The house was smaller, 2,400 square feet as promised, but warm and thoughtfully arranged. Amanda opened the door with a composed smile that reached her eyes. The kitchen counters were simpler, the finishes less extravagant, yet the atmosphere felt grounded. They cooked together, moving around each other with cooperation rather than hierarchy. Daniel discussed his new budgeting spreadsheet, explaining how every dollar now had purpose. Amanda described planting herbs in a small backyard garden instead of hiring landscapers. Evelyn listened, not instructing, not correcting, only witnessing. When dessert was served, Daniel raised his glass of sparkling water. "To foundations," he said quietly. Amanda nodded in agreement. Evelyn met their eyes and lifted her glass as well. The word no longer carried tension. It carried understanding. That evening, when she returned to her own driveway, the porch light glowed softly against the dark sky. She stepped inside and set her keys on the entry table, the familiar click echoing gently through the foyer. The house welcomed her not as a battleground reclaimed, but as a space aligned with truth. She walked to the back porch and looked out over the yard she had once chosen from a catalog and paid for in quiet sacrifice. There had been no confrontation in public, no demand for apology, no dramatic reversal. Only structure, patience, and the calm insistence that respect begins with boundaries. The wind moved lightly through the trees, carrying the scent of fresh earth and blooming flowers. Evelyn closed her eyes for a brief moment, feeling the steady ground beneath her feet. She had not corrected them with anger. She had corrected the foundation beneath illusion. And in the quiet rhythm of her own home, dignity did not ask to be seen. It simply remained steady and undeniable, like the name written clearly on every page that mattered.